I think they would have surrendered anyway, but I mean, a lot later, because even after the 2 bombs went off.
What if a single letter could erase a queen consort's entire legacy? Buried deep in royal archives, such a document allegedly exists and has been discovered. Penned by Prince Philip and sealed until after his death, it labeled a destabilizing force and demanded intervention. Queen Elizabeth reportedly read it, approved it, and quietly locked it away. Why did it terrify the palace? Who did it secretly elevate? And why do insiders now fear its release? Join us as we uncover a letter that some wish had never survived. The letter that could rewrite the monarchy. The discovery of the letter itself was unexpected. It surfaced during a routine archival review. Buried beneath decades of documents was this sealed envelope marked only with Prince Philip's personal insignia and a handwritten directive to be opened upon my passing in the presence of the keeper and one blood heir. His instructions were very particular about the timing and who had the authority to break its seal. The specifics definitely aroused suspicions. Very few individuals within the inner court were aware that such a document even existed. Charles was reportedly unaware, William as well. Even the Queen's early awareness remains disputed, despite later approval. That secrecy appeared deliberate, rather than accidental. When the seal was finally broken, those present reportedly were shocked upon discovering its content. According to witnesses from the room, the tone of the letter left no room for misinterpretation. This was not diplomatic language. There were no coded phrases or ceremonial buffers. The message was straight to the point. According to palace insiders, there were quiet meetings and legal consultations. Clauses allegedly drafted to permanently block certain family lines. Strategic protections reinforced around Catherine. Long-term positioning centered on Prince George. Even a cryptic public message attributed to the young prince later fueled speculation online, adding pressure the palace struggled to contain. This explains the urgency surrounding suppression. The royal public relations apparatus has reportedly worked overtime to keep the story fragmented, uncertain, and dismissed as rumor. The concern is not scandal, it is a precedent. Because once the contents of that letter is fully exposed, the narrative surrounding legitimacy, loyalty, and succession may never look the same again. Let's uncover its content. The inheritance that draws a line in the sand. Prince Philip's personal fortune was never part of crown finances. It was accumulated privately and deliberately kept separate from royal accounts. That fortune, according to verified records, was entrusted to Catherine, Princess of Wales. Just as important is who was excluded. Camilla, Queen Consort, was named nowhere in the distribution. Camilla was actively excluded in writing. Those present during the reading described the atmosphere as suffocating. One aide later admitted, under anonymity, that the moment felt like a force reaching out from beyond the grave, gripping the institution itself. The wording left no room for reinterpretation or softening. Prince Philip praised Catherine's devotion to duty and sense of responsibility, then sharply contrasted it with what he described as conflicted motivations that threatened the clarity and stability of the crown. That phrase landed heavily, conflicted motivations. Within the palace walls, there was no confusion about its meaning. The implication was devastating, not just personally but politically. It suggested a fracture at the heart of the monarchy, one that Philip believed could no longer be ignored. At Clarence House, where Charles and Camilla had settled into a sense of assumed permanence and influence, panic followed. Advisors moved quickly. Authenticity had to be questioned.
Having been lucky enough to meet some of our country's amazing charities and organizations.
Was the document real? Could it be forged? Was it the product of hostile factions or tabloid fantasy? Every possibility was explored. Each investigation returned the same conclusion. The handwriting was Philip's. The legal structure was sound. The witnesses were legitimate. Every test confirmed the same reality. That confirmation triggered a second crisis. Senior courtiers, tasked with protecting the monarchy's image at all costs, quietly debated suppression. The idea was simple and dangerous. Bury the document, minimize its relevance, treat it as a private note rather than a binding directive. Political convenience demanded silence. However, those efforts failed. An internal override was issued by the keeper of the Privy Seal, a rare and consequential move. Philip's final directive, regardless of discomfort, had to be logged and honored. One official later summarized the moment with brutal accuracy. The letter was a political earthquake disguised as a personal decision. What followed made the situation even more fragile. New evidence suggests Queen Elizabeth was aware of the letter before Philip's death. Leaked diary entries from one of her former ladies-in-waiting indicate the sealed document was shown to her weeks earlier. She read it, understood its implications, and kept the knowledge to herself. Whether this silence came from respect for her husband's wishes or the understanding that disclosure would destabilize the monarchy beyond repair remains unknown. What is certain is that she carried the weight of that secret to her grave. But the question is, why did Prince Philip make such a decision? The weight of responsibility. To understand why Prince Philip took such a dramatic, personal, and politically explosive stand, the timeline must be rewound to his final years. Behind the formal appearances and carefully staged unity, Philip witnessed a monarchy turning inward, divided against itself. Two competing visions for the crown were taking shape. One centered on duty and continuity. The other leaned toward disruption and personal influence. What unsettled Philip was what unfolded privately. The divide deepened into opposing camps. On one side stood William and Catherine, representing stability. On the other was a future Philip feared lacked clarity. The letter was not written out of sentiment. It was written out of alarm. The choice Philip made for the crown's survival. The next generation was already being shaped to carry weight without complaint. That principle sat at the heart of the Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood, launched a year earlier with two clear purposes. The first was to improve early childhood outcomes. The second was prevention of long-term social fracture by strengthening foundations early. A lifelong student of power and history, Philip had spent decades observing how monarchies endured and how they collapsed. He understood that institutions rarely fall from scandal alone. They fall from confusion, from losing a coherent center and allowing competing identities to exist under a single crown. A monarchy, in Philip's view, could survive controversy. It could weather public anger. What it could not survive was uncertainty about what it represented. According to multiple palace insiders, growing influence from Camilla over both public presentation and private decision-making intensified those concerns. Philip understood influence. For more than 70 years, influence had been exercised quietly behind the throne. That role was familiar. What unsettled him, according to one longtime footman, was the sense that priorities were drifting away from the institution and persona. In one recorded but never public conversation with a senior courtier, Philip reportedly issued a stark warning: allow parallel lines of power, and the crown loses its center. At the same time, respect for Catherine deepened. While others engaged in public battles over image and narrative, Catherine remained calm. A former Windsor footman later recalled Philip referring to Catherine as the monarchy's spine, unnoticed by many but essential to everything standing upright. These concerns expanded beyond character into succession itself. In his final months, Philip raised repeated alarms during late-night calls to Windsor. With Charles approaching the throne after the longest wait of any heir in British history, unresolved skepticism surrounding Camilla's role posed serious risks. Public doubt, left untreated, could harden into constitutional tension. What if trust continued to erode and internal divisions turned into open defiance? These were not dramatic hypotheticals. Philip had witnessed the collapse of European monarchies within his own lifetime. He had seen crowns fall from miscalculation and loss of legitimacy. History had taught him that institutions rarely get a second warning, so planning began in the form of strategic intervention that is designed to activate when direct influence was no longer possible. That intervention took the form of a letter. What were the exact instructions in the letter, and what impact would it have on Camilla's authority? The seal had already been broken. As the contents were read aloud, those present noted an immediate stillness. Prince Philip had named Catherine, not the queen consort and not his own children, as the steward of his personal fortune. This wealth existed entirely outside sovereign estates. They were trusts, investments, foreign holdings, and assets that have been accumulated quietly over decades, amounting to tens of millions of pounds. It is money that carries influence by virtue of independence. With that designation came responsibility.
Political means of public interest, put it that way, and there's an awful lot of stuff which is of public interest.
It reinforced a future rooted in restraint rather than reinvention. In Philip's calculation, the survival of the monarchy required a single, coherent center of gravity, and Catherine embodied that center. However, Catherine's reaction to the content of the letter was that of shock. It was never the money that unsettled Catherine most. Wealth, even in staggering amounts, was not unfamiliar territory within royal life. What cut far deeper was the weight of trust attached to it. The realization that Prince Philip had made a deliberate declaration with one name etched into history was impossible to ignore. Later that evening, inside a quiet Kensington study, the letter was reportedly read 3 times for acceptance. Acting on Philip's directive meant open defiance of Camilla and potential tension with King Charles himself. Ignoring it would mean betraying a final act of trust from a man who had chosen his successor in principle, if not in title. The reaction from Prince William was far more complicated. According to multiple palace aides, the situation placed him at the center of an impossible conflict. Loyalty to a newly crowned father collided with responsibility toward a wife abruptly thrust into a quiet but dangerous proxy war. Observers described growing tension, shortened patience, and long solitary walks through Windsor's East Gallery late at night. One phrase, overheard and repeated, captured the mood. Philip had known exactly what this would trigger. Nothing about the Duke of Edinburgh's actions suggested accident or sentimentality. Every move carried intent. The letter was calculated, structured to force a reckoning that could not be postponed or quietly smoothed over. Within a family where loyalty is measured through glances, pauses, and omissions, this document landed like a thunderclap. Faced with consequences that extended far beyond personal comfort, Catherine sought counsel from someone who understood both Philip's mindset and the ruthless logic of institutional survival. That person was Princess Anne. Reports suggest a discreet meeting took place in the private gardens at Sandringham. According to circulating accounts, the advice offered was precise and unsentimental. Fulfill the request, but do so on personal terms. That guidance shaped everything that followed. From that moment, all direct communication with Camilla ceased entirely. No private exchanges or even acknowledgement during public engagements.
I've been actually trying to keep quiet about reaching 3/4 of a century.
In a system built on silent diplomacy, this absence was unmistakable. It was boundary setting. As days passed, subtle changes began to surface. Administrative channels shifted, and briefings once routed elsewhere began passing through Catherine's office. Patronage reports arrived directly at the desk of her private secretary. Invitations to high-level engagements were addressed first to Catherine, then circulated outward. No announcements accompanied these changes. None were needed. Courtiers began asking questions behind closed doors. How far would this realignment go? How much resistance would emerge? And most critically, how would Camilla respond to being edged out without a single public confrontation? The answer arrived quickly. The most anticipated response. Camilla was never expected to be sidelined. When Philip's letter was read aloud during a confidential Privy Council review, the reaction was immediate and unrestrained. Seasoned courtiers later described the moment as volcanic, with raised voices and flared temper. This was not about finances. It was about legitimacy and recognition as more than a spouse, but as a central matriarch of the monarchy. Philip's letter struck directly at that claim, challenging the permanence of Camilla's role. Within hours, a private meeting with King Charles was summoned. What began as a tense discussion reportedly escalated into ultimatums. Sources claim threats were made to withdraw from public duties entirely, a move that would destabilize a reign still finding its footing. The pressure placed on the new king was immense. That was the crisis Philip may have anticipated, a choice between honoring a father's final directive and protecting a wife's standing. Clarence House operatives moved to reframe the narrative. Draft statements emphasized personal sentiment over legal authority. Friendly journalists received carefully worded briefings suggesting the letter reflected late-life musings rather than enforceable directives. References were made to other private notes written during Philip's final months, subtly implying inconsistency. But those efforts faltered against one immovable fact. The letter had been signed, witnessed, and formally logged. With external containment proving ineffective, focus turned inward. Alliances were reinforced among senior palace figures, particularly within the protocol Clarion, a powerful advisory circle known for interpreting constitutional gray areas in ways that protect existing authority. Meetings multiplied, precedents were reviewed, language was scrutinized line by line in search of flexibility, and Catherine remained silent. Within palace walls, one truth grew increasingly clear. Prince Philip's final move had succeeded in doing exactly what it was designed to do. But Camilla was never going to let go of the reins so easily. What was her next move? The counteroffensive inside the palace. The first coordinated response came quietly. A private strategy session was convened at Highgrove, where Camilla reportedly demanded a full audit of all shared royal patronages, in which Catherine held measurable influence. The objective was straightforward.
It takes you into a sort of multitude of different worlds.
Recalibrate authority, get back control over the ground already lost, and reassert control before momentum hardened into permanence. Soon after, changes began to surface across the royal structure. They were subtle, procedural, and carefully justified, but the pattern was unmistakable. Two charities, long associated with Prince Philip, were abruptly reassigned under Camilla's oversight. An education initiative closely identified with Catherine was paused under the explanation of a structural review. Administrative levers were simply pulled. Then came a move that removed all doubt about intent. Camilla began laying the groundwork to fast-track her son, Tom Parker Bowles, into a formal palace-adjacent role under the banner of public outreach and modernization. The signal was unmistakable. Influence would not pass her family by quietly. Any attempt to redraw legacy lines would be challenged directly. Pressure followed. Reports emerged that the keeper of the royal archives, the official who had authorized the release and logging of Prince Philip's letter, was contacted by Camilla's office. The language, according to one source, raised concerns about security breaches and internal loyalty. The implication required no translation. The keeper, a long-standing loyalist to both the late Queen and Prince Philip, refused to bend. Compliance was denied, but the message landed clearly. Opposition would carry consequences. As Camilla consolidated allies and prepared for escalation, another movement began to take shape elsewhere inside the palace. This one formed quietly, deliberately, and around the very figure Philip had chosen. Not everyone supported retaliation. In discreet meetings conducted with the caution of intelligence briefings, a compact alliance began to assemble. Palace insiders later referred to it as the Inner Four. The mission was narrow and precise: protect Catherine, uphold Philip's final directive, and prevent the monarchy's future from being consolidated under Camilla's control. The composition of the group mattered.
When you go there, you look at the place, particularly from above when you go.
Princess Anne stood at its core, Philip's daughter, shaped by duty and discipline, long regarded as the family's clearest thinker on institutional responsibility. Duchess Sophie brought quiet credibility, trusted across factions, fluent in discretion, and respected for consistency rather than ambition. Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, joined despite the risks, having privately expressed concern over unchecked influence within Clarence House. Completing the circle was Lord Fellows, a legal authority so embedded in royal protocol that colleagues referred to him as a living archive. Together, they formed a stabilizing wall against what they viewed as a dangerous deviation from the monarchy's center. The first meeting was arranged at Sandringham, coordinated through Princess Anne's personal network. Security protocols were tightened to an unusual degree. Even household staff were deliberately kept unaware of the purpose, timing, or attendees. This was not a secret drama. It was containment. Philip's letter was examined line by line. Its legal authority, its timing, its subtext, its consequences.
I think that the main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage.
According to fragments later recovered from discarded notes, the tone of discussion was urgent but controlled. One sentence appeared repeatedly in those pages. This is not rebellion, but preservation. That distinction mattered. These were not rogue actors seeking to undermine authority. They saw themselves as the monarchy's immune response, activating to defend against internal destabilization. Lord Fellows raised immediate legal concerns. If Philip's private wealth was to pass fully and uncontested to Catherine, the structure had to be immune to challenge. Trust law, jurisdictional firewalls, asset separation, every vulnerability had to be sealed. Sir Clive then confirmed something that reframed the discussion entirely. In the years preceding his death, Philip had quietly reorganized specific holdings, investments, and offshore trusts. These assets were deliberately detached from crown property and sovereign estates. This was not spontaneous. It was systematic. Planning had begun years earlier. Philip had anticipated resistance. Then came the most unsettling discovery. Buried within estate documentation was a secondary clause, rarely referenced and almost never used in royal instruments. It described the appointment of an unshakable moral steward. The phrase appeared nowhere else in royal precedent. Its presence was intentional. The Inner Four interpreted the language as coded authority, not merely an endorsement of Catherine as beneficiary, but as guardian of something larger: moral continuity, institutional conscience, a safeguard against drift. Philip had not only distributed wealth, he had assigned responsibility. Discussion intensified when Princess Anne disclosed a detail that altered the entire timeline. According to accounts circulating within palace walls, Anne herself had delivered Philip's original letter to Catherine, quietly, directly, without intermediaries. If true, this meant Anne had known from the beginning. The plan had not emerged in reaction to events. It had been in motion long before. Anne was not a bystander. She was the courier, and in practice, an executor of her father's intent. That revelation shifted internal dynamics. The directive was not isolated. It was supported.
To you, but also your response to that, which is equally important.
Reinforced, protected from the outset. Meanwhile, surveillance increased. Another faction, informally known as the Clarion Ring, began tracking movement and meetings. This group, composed of Camilla-aligned loyalists and entrenched traditionalists, specialized in constitutional interpretation favorable to existing power structures. Two forces were now active within the same institution, operating under opposing assumptions of legitimacy. One side sought consolidation, the other continuity. Administrative skirmishes followed, and competing legal opinions circulated. Advisory memos contradicted one another without attribution. Invitations overlapped deliberately. Patronage calendars were reshuffled. There was nothing explosive, but still, the pressure mounted. What became increasingly clear was this: Philip's final act had triggered more than a dispute over inheritance. It had activated an internal reckoning about what the monarchy was meant to protect. The Inner Four understood time was not neutral. Prince Philip had anticipated this moment. The counteroffensive was already built into the architecture he left behind. What remained uncertain was not whether conflict would continue, but which definition of the crown would survive it. The clause that changed everything. Tension thickened inside the palace. The atmosphere shifted from unease to calculation. Every corridor felt like a chessboard, each side advancing without noise, but with intent. Camilla's camp moved to intercept communications, tightening control over briefings and access. In response, the Inner Four became even more discreet, relying on intermediaries, handwritten notes, and proxy advisors to shield their coordination. Then it became clear that Prince Philip had not left just one document behind. What surfaced next cast a far darker shadow over King Charles's reign. For years, rumors had circulated about a hidden clause buried deep within Philip's private directives. Insiders referred to it only as the sunset provision. Its existence was never confirmed, dismissed as speculation, until a sealed annex was discovered inside Philip's Geneva lockbox. The location was deliberate. Switzerland sat outside UK jurisdiction, beyond quiet revisions or royal influence. From that moment, the stakes changed. The annex was encrypted and protected by layered international legal safeguards. Access was restricted to only two people: Philip's longtime solicitor, Edward Lassenby, and Princess Anne. When it was finally opened inside a Geneva vault, under the supervision of legal representatives from 3 countries, the implications raced back toward Buckingham Palace with devastating force. The document, formally labeled Codicil 4B, carried instructions of absolute finality. Philip declared that no asset, material or symbolic, institutional or personal, could pass to or through a consort lacking sovereign lineage. The language was precise. There was no ambiguity. In effect, Camilla and any descendant or dependent connected to her were excluded not only from Philip's fortune, but from any structure, trust, or legacy bearing his name. This was not a limitation, it was severance. The sunset provision functioned as a failsafe. Philip framed it as a defense against the redirection of institutional equity toward figures unbound by royal succession. Legally, it was airtight. Politically, it was devastating. Within palace walls, no one doubted the intended target. Camilla had been written out, completely, irrevocably. Panic followed. Charles's legal advisors were thrust into crisis mode. Because the document was notarized in Switzerland, UK estate law had no authority to contest it. There would be no quiet adjustments, no reinterpretation, no procedural escape routes. Worse still, the clause contained a reversion mechanism. Any attempt to undermine or bypass the provision would automatically divert the entire estate, estimated in the tens of millions, into an undisclosed external trust. If challenged, the fortune would vanish beyond royal reach altogether. One advisor reportedly summarized it bluntly. Philip had planned like a general. Nothing was left exposed. Attention turned immediately to Princess Anne. Speculation intensified that she had known about the sunset provision for years, holding it back as a strategic reserve. If that was true, the timing of its emergence was no accident. It landed not as disruption, but as reckoning. Anne neither confirmed nor denied involvement. Silence was the only response. By now, the pattern was impossible to ignore. This was not a dying man's letter. It was a timed detonation. Every safeguard, every delay, every jurisdictional barrier had been designed to activate at the precise moment resistance would peak. And now, it had. Then came Catherine's move. It did not arrive with anger or spectacle. Instead, early one morning, the Royal Communications Office released a short statement. Its impact was immediate. The Philip Stewardship Trust had been established. The trust was private, independent, and legally autonomous. Its purpose was to uphold the values Philip had defended throughout his life: service, duty, resilience, and restraint. Crucially, it would not be governed by Buckingham Palace. It would operate outside palace control and answer directly to the public. In one stroke, Philip's legacy had been moved beyond internal power struggles. Catherine declined direct inheritance. There is no personal claim, accumulation of wealth. Instead, trustees were appointed figures known for independence, integrity, and loyalty to the mission, rather than the monarchy. Legal teams who had spent weeks dissecting the Sunset Clause found themselves sidelined entirely. The maneuver was devastating in its restraint. Catherine honored Philip's intent without appearing to seize advantage. Authority was exercised without ownership. Power was redirected without confrontation. The fortune remained protected, the legacy preserved, and the monarchy's internal conflict neutralized by removal of the prize itself. For seasoned observers, the message was unmistakable. The game had changed. Philip had set the board, and Catherine had ended the match. Now the question is, what's next? The legacy placed beyond reach. By restructuring Prince Philip's legacy through independent architecture, Catherine removed Camilla from the equation entirely. Access was denied through design. The maneuver was precise, bloodless, and irreversible. Authority was not seized, it was relocated. The shift extended far beyond finances or titles. Several of Prince Philip's most significant patronages were quietly reassigned. His military affiliations, long-standing environmental initiatives, and even the Duke of Edinburgh's award were redirected away from traditional senior royals. Instead, stewardship began moving toward the next generation: Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Lady Louise Windsor. It was not announced as a transfer of power. It functioned as one. This redirection formed a silent succession plan. No debates, no press briefings, no emotional appeals. Legacy was repositioned through action. Philip's memory was not claimed or curated. It was planted forward, anchored in youth, continuity, and time. The message was unmistakable. The future mattered more than the present dispute. Public reaction followed swiftly. Approval ratings for Catherine surged to levels not recorded since the early years of Princess Diana. Editorials framed her as the conscience of the crown. Analysts described the shift as stabilizing rather than divisive. Online discourse labeled the moment a quiet coronation, not of title, but of authority. At the same time, Camilla's public standing deteriorated further. Already weakened by revelations surrounding Philip's letter, her image became increasingly associated with internal division. For the first time in years, polling reflected a clear contrast. Catherine represented continuity and restraint. Camilla represented fracture and contention. Then came a moment that ended speculation. An unreleased segment from a BBC archival documentary surfaced.
William described Prince Philip as an extraordinary man from an extraordinary generation.
The footage, withheld for years, showed Prince Philip seated beside Queen Elizabeth, speaking openly about younger members of the family. When asked who truly understood duty, Philip paused, smiled slightly, and answered plainly, "Catherine." The remark was brief. It carried no embellishment. It carried no ambiguity. The footage aired globally. The timing was exact. Palace officials offered no explanation. Cornered by legal finality and overwhelming public alignment, Buckingham Palace released a short, carefully worded statement. It formally recognized Catherine as steward of Prince Philip's private charitable intentions. King Charles, according to aides, raised no objection. Publicly, calm returned to palace life. Appearances resumed, schedules normalized. But within that calm, the balance had shifted. Then came an unexpected voice. During a routine public engagement in Wales, cameras rolling and reporters present, Prince George was asked a simple question. What did he want to be when he grew up? Standing beside Catherine, surrounded by other children, the young prince paused before answering. The response was brief. He would do what his great-grandfather asked. He would take care of it. The moment traveled instantly. Clips circulated across platforms within hours. The words were cryptic, unusually composed, and immediately linked to the months of upheaval surrounding Philip's legacy. Palace press officers moved quickly, framing the response as innocent and symbolic. Inside palace corridors, the reaction was different. Whispers spread that the answer had not been accidental. Sources close to Catherine suggested that preparation had begun quietly, not through formal instruction or pressure, but through exposure. Stories of Philip's life, conversations about service and restraint, carefully chosen tutors, lessons focused on history, constitutional balance, and the difference between authority and legitimacy. The objective was not to prepare a ruler. It was to shape understanding. George was being taught that the crown is not inherited by right alone, but sustained through responsibility. That holding power and deserving it are not the same. That duty requires silence as often as speech. Another rumor soon followed. The sealed Philip archive, believed by many to have been absorbed into royal records or destroyed, may have been preserved intact. If accurate, the implication was significant. Philip's voice would not remain in the past. It would be carried forward, a private record of institutional memory. Observations from a man who spent 70 years watching monarchies endure and collapse. a guide not written for the public, but for a future king. No confirmation was offered. An uneasy calm now sits over Buckingham Palace. Catherine continues her duties without visible change. The Philip Stewardship Trust operates independently, funding causes tied to service, resilience, and public responsibility. Its governance remains insulated from palace politics. Its mission is fixed. Camilla appears at state functions and fulfills the formal role of queen consort. Protocol is observed. Appearances are correct, but those who observe closely note the absence of warmth between her and Catherine. No reconciliation has been staged. No unity narrative has been advanced. Silence has replaced conflict. King Charles maintains public neutrality. The choice avoids escalation, but it carries weight. Caught between his father's final design and his wife's standing, the path chosen favors stability over resolution. Palace insiders suggest the cost is personal. In the long run, Prince Philip's letter achieved its purpose. It forced clarity and ended years of ambiguity. The monarchy had to face questions it had postponed about identity, direction, and continuity. The future of the crown shifted away from image management and back to principle. Responsibility did not fall to committees or advisors. It rested on one figure who neither sought power nor resisted duty. Acceptance came quietly, without announcement. Authority followed naturally, without demand. This was the quality Philip valued and recognized early. In the end, legacy was not entrusted to bloodline alone, but to restraint and discipline. And if this decision was made in silence, how much of royal history do we still not know? What if what the monarchy truly needs is reinvention and change? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.